On the morning of his 66th birthday, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, formerly known as Prince Andrew, was arrested, and police vehicles were seen outside properties linked to Sandringham and Windsor. According to official statements, officers arrived early, conducted searches, and detained a man in his 60s on suspicion of misconduct in public office. Authorities did not publicly name him at the time, but multiple major outlets reported that the investigation centers on Andrew's past role as the UK's trade envoy, and allegations that confidential information may have been shared inappropriately. So how did a royal birthday become a legal turning point? And what exactly are investigators looking into? This isn't about speculation. It's about what has been confirmed, what has been denied, and what this moment could mean for the monarchy going forward. Because when law enforcement steps onto royal property, the story is no longer just personal. It becomes constitutional. The strongest and most immediate fact is this: Thames Valley Police confirmed an arrest. In a public statement, the force said that on February 19th, they arrested a man in his 60s from Norfolk on suspicion of misconduct in public office, and were conducting searches at addresses in Berkshire and Norfolk. The individual remains in custody, and police stated they would not be naming him at this time. However, multiple reputable outlets, including the BBC, reported that the man in question is Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. Now here's where context matters. Andrew previously served as the United Kingdom's Special Representative for International Trade and Investment from 2001 to 2011. In that role, he acted as a trade envoy, promoting British business interests abroad. It's a position that carries diplomatic sensitivity and, importantly, a continuing duty of confidentiality, even after the role ends. And this is precisely where the current investigation reportedly focuses. According to publicly available information, the anti-monarchy advocacy group Republic filed a complaint alleging suspected misconduct in public office. The complaint referenced emails that were recently released by the U.S. Department of Justice as part of ongoing document disclosures connected to Jeffrey Epstein. The allegation suggests that confidential trade-related material may have been shared during Andrew's time as envoy. It's important to underline this clearly. Andrew has consistently denied any wrongdoing in relation to Jeffrey Epstein. But what changed now? Earlier this month, Thames Valley Police confirmed they were assessing whether the newly released emails provided grounds for a formal investigation. That assessment appears to have led to today's arrest and property searches. And then came another unexpected development. In a statement issued on February 9th, Buckingham Palace said that King Charles had expressed profound concern regarding allegations related to Mr. Mountbatten-Windsor's conduct. The palace also stated that if approached by police, they would cooperate fully. That wording was notable. For the first time in recent memory, the palace publicly referenced Andrew's conduct in direct relation to an ongoing legal review. So let's zoom out for a moment. Andrew's ties to Jeffrey Epstein have been under scrutiny for years. Epstein, an American financier who was convicted of sex offenses and later died in custody in 2019 while awaiting trial on federal charges, had long-standing connections with high-profile figures worldwide. Andrew stepped back from public royal duties in November 2019, following a widely discussed BBC interview in which he addressed his relationship with Epstein. In 2022, Queen Elizabeth II stripped him of his military affiliations and royal patronages after a U.S. civil lawsuit filed by Virginia Giuffre proceeded in court. Andrew denied her allegations and later reached a settlement without admitting liability. Since then, he has not carried out public royal duties, but the story did not end there. In October 2025, King Charles removed Andrew's remaining royal titles and honors, an unprecedented move that further formalized his separation from official royal responsibilities. Andrew subsequently left Royal Lodge in Windsor and relocated to Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate. And that is where police vehicles were photographed on the morning of his birthday. Think about the symbolism. A former senior royal, a birthday, multiple police cars, searches at properties connected to royal estates. Even without dramatic language, the visual alone is powerful. But legally, what does misconduct in public office actually mean? In UK law, it generally refers to a public officer willfully neglecting to perform duties, or willfully misconducting themselves to such a degree that it amounts to an abuse of the public's trust. It's a Serious allegation, but an arrest does not equal a charge, and a charge does not equal a conviction. That distinction matters. At this stage, authorities have confirmed an arrest and searches. They have not announced formal charges, they have not released detailed evidence publicly, and they have not provided a timeline for next steps. So what happens now? Typically, investigators review seized materials, assess communications, and determine whether sufficient evidence exists to bring formal charges. That process can take time. Meanwhile, public reaction has been measured but intense. The Director of Public Prosecution, Stephen Parkinson, told the Sunday Times recently, "Nobody is above the law. It's my job to enforce the law, and I do so without fear or favor." That statement wasn't directly tied to the arrest announcement, but in the context of recent events, it carries weight. And here's the bigger question. What does this mean for King Charles? The monarchy operates on public trust and constitutional neutrality. Any legal investigation involving a close family member places that balance under strain. The palace's statement emphasized cooperation and reiterated sympathy for victims of abuse, language that signals institutional distance from Andrew's personal legal matters. In other words, the Crown appears to be drawing a clear line. But lines in royal history are rarely simple. Remember, Andrew is not just a former royal figure. He is the king's brother. He was once second in line to the throne. His daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, remain part of the extended royal family. So this is not just a legal event, it's a family event, a constitutional event, and potentially a defining moment for how modern monarchy handles accountability. And yet, the most critical phase is still ahead. Will there be charges? Will there be a court case? Or will investigators conclude there is insufficient evidence? At this moment, we simply don't know. What we do know is that the timing, the optics, and the institutional response mark a significant escalation compared to previous developments. And this raises another quiet but important question. Is this the final chapter in Andrew's long-running controversy, or the beginning of a new one? Because if formal proceedings move forward, it could test not only one individual's defense, but the broader relationship between royalty and rule of law in the 21st century. And that's where the story becomes bigger than one birthday morning. Now let's slow this down and look at the mechanics of what's unfolding. Because this case isn't just about one person's past actions. It's about how modern institutions respond when new information surfaces years later. According to publicly available reporting, the complaint that triggered the police review was filed by the advocacy group Republic. Their claim focused on email, correspondence that became public through releases by the U.S. Department of Justice. Those documents were part of broader disclosures connected to the late Jeffrey Epstein. Here's the key point. The emails themselves weren't newly written. They were newly disclosed. That distinction matters because law enforcement action often hinges not on when something happened, but when credible evidence becomes available for review. When previously sealed or private communications enter the public record, investigators can reassess whether any laws may have been breached. And in this case, the alleged issue is not social contact, association, or reputation. It's the handling of confidential information tied to a government role. Andrew served as a trade envoy at a time when the UK was expanding international business ties. The position involved access to commercially sensitive briefings, diplomatic insights, and strategic discussions. Even after leaving that post, the duty to protect such information remains in effect, so investigators are reportedly asking one central question. Was any protected material shared with someone who had no right to receive it? This is where the story gets technical, and also where it gets misunderstood online. Many viral posts frame this as a personal scandal story, but the alleged legal issue is institutional. It's about whether the rules of public office were followed. That's a very different legal framework than the controversies that previously pushed Andrew out of public life. And this brings us to another layer most people miss. Why now? The timing isn't random. Earlier this year, additional documents tied to Epstein-related investigations were released in the U.S. These releases included correspondence involving high-profile figures. Once those documents became publicly accessible, advocacy groups and journalists began cross-referencing them with past public roles held by those individuals. That process led to formal complaints. And formal complaints trigger mandatory assessments by police forces. They can't simply ignore a complaint that alleges misconduct in public office if the claim is grounded in newly available material. So the arrest, as striking as it looks, is part of a procedural chain. New disclosures to formal complaint to police assessment to arrest, and searches to preserve potential evidence. It's methodical, not theatrical. Still, the optics are intense. Multiple police vehicles were photographed at Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate, property linked to King Charles III. Additional searches reportedly took place at addresses connected to Windsor. That imagery has already shaped public perception, because for many people it's the first time they've seen law enforcement activity visibly intersect with royal residences, and perception matters. In modern constitutional monarchies, the symbolic separation between the crown and law, enforcement is delicate. The palace's statement emphasized cooperation, a signal that institutional boundaries are being respected. But behind the scenes, this likely creates operational complexity. Royal properties involve security protocols, access permissions, and coordination with protective services. Even routine searches would require careful planning to ensure safety, legality, and minimal disruption. So the fact that searches took place at all suggests that investigators believe evidence relevant to their inquiry could reasonably be found at those locations. That doesn't imply guilt, it implies due process. Now let's talk about Andrew's response, or lack of public response. So far, there has been no new personal statement from Andrew addressing the arrest itself. In past controversies, he has consistently denied wrongdoing related to Epstein and has not admitted liability in civil matters. Legal advisors often recommend minimal public comment during active investigations, especially when evidence collection is ongoing. So silence at this stage isn't unusual, but silence also creates a vacuum, and vacuums get filled with speculation. That's why it's important to separate confirmed facts from online narratives. Confirmed, an arrest occurred. Confirmed. Searches took place. Confirmed. The investigation relates to alleged misconduct in public office. Confirmed, the palace said it would cooperate if approached. What is not confirmed publicly, the specific content of any emails under review, whether any confidential documents were actually shared, whether charges will be filed, how long the investigation will continue. This is the in-between phase of a legal process, the part that's slow, technical, and rarely dramatic in real life. But there's another angle that's quietly significant. Public trust. Over the past decade, institutions across many countries have faced questions about transparency, accountability, and whether status creates informal immunity. High-profile cases tend to become symbolic, regardless of their eventual legal outcome. This investigation will likely be watched not only for what it concludes, but for how it proceeds. Is the process consistent with how similar cases are handled? Are legal standards applied evenly? Is communication measured and factual? Those questions shape how the public interprets fairness, not just in this case, but in the system as a whole. And that leads to the deeper tension at the heart of this story. Can a centuries-old institution adapt to modern expectations of accountability in real time under global scrutiny? The monarchy has been reshaping itself, streamlining roles, clarifying boundaries, and emphasizing service. This moment tests whether that transformation extends to uncomfortable situations involving family members. So while headlines focus on one arrest, the real story may be unfolding in institutional behavior. How openly authorities communicate. How carefully the palace maintains distance from personal legal matters. And how consistently the rule of law is applied. Because in the long run, this won't be remembered only as the day of an arrest. It may be remembered as a case study in how modern power structures respond when past actions meet present-day scrutiny. And the next step, whether charges are brought or the investigation is closed, will shape that narrative far more than the headlines we've seen so far. So what happens next? Procedurally, not emotionally. After an arrest on suspicion of misconduct in public office, investigators typically enter an evidence review phase. Materials gathered during searches are cataloged, digital communications are examined, and legal thresholds are assessed. Prosecutors then decide whether the available evidence meets the standard required to bring formal charges. That standard is not about public opinion. It's about admissible evidence and likelihood of conviction. In the United Kingdom, that decision would involve the Crown Prosecution Service, which evaluates whether there is sufficient evidence and whether prosecution is in the public interest. Only if both tests are met do formal charges proceed. If charges are not filed, the case can be closed without trial. If charges are filed, court proceedings begin. And those unfold in structured, transparent stages. Right now, we are at the earliest confirmed stage, and that early stage creates uncertainty. Will this investigation remain limited to document handling? Could it expand based on what is discovered, or could it conclude quietly if no breach is substantiated? Those outcomes are very different, but they all begin from the same procedural foundation. Now consider the broader context. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has already experienced significant institutional consequences over the past several years. He stepped back from public duties in 2019. In 2022, he lost military affiliations and patronages. In 2025, he was stripped of remaining royal titles and honors. Those were constitutional and reputational actions, not criminal rulings. This current development, however, is explicitly legal. That distinction matters. Institutional discipline and legal accountability operate under different systems. One is guided by royal discretion and public optics. The other is governed by statute and evidentiary law. And when the two intersect, it tests clarity. King Charles III has signaled institutional distance. Buckingham Palace's statement emphasized cooperation and concern, while making clear that specific claims are for Mr. Mountbatten-Windsor to address personally. That wording reinforces a boundary: the monarchy as an institution, the individual as a private citizen. But even that line is complex. Andrew remains the king's brother. His daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, are still public figures within the extended royal structure. Family dynamics and constitutional roles overlap in ways that are difficult to separate completely. And yet, from a legal standpoint, the principle is straightforward. Nobody is above the law. That phrase, recently echoed by Director of Public Prosecution Stephen Parkinson, reflects a broader expectation in democratic societies: that accountability mechanisms apply uniformly, regardless of background or status. The real impact of this case may depend less on its outcome and more on its transparency. If investigators communicate clearly, apply consistent standards, and avoid sensationalism, public trust can remain stable even during controversy. If ambiguity dominates, speculation fills the space, and speculation in high-profile cases tends to outpace facts. That's why responsible reporting and responsible viewing matters here. It's easy to frame this as dramatic. It's harder and more accurate to frame it as procedural. An arrest is not a conviction. An investigation is not a verdict. A search is not proof of wrongdoing. Those distinctions protect everyone involved, including the integrity of the legal system itself. So, as this story develops, watch for concrete updates. Has the individual been formally charged? Has bail been granted or extended? Has the Crown Prosecution Service issued a decision? Have additional official statements been released? Those milestones will define the next phase. Until then, the most significant takeaway may be symbolic: a modern monarchy operating within a modern legal framework. Visibly. For decades, royal matters were often handled behind closed doors. Today, legal processes unfold in public view, documented by independent media and subject to judicial oversight. That visibility changes expectations. And perhaps that is the real turning point in this story. Not simply the arrest itself, but the demonstration that institutions, even historic ones, function inside contemporary accountability systems. When history looks back at this moment, it may not focus on the birthday timing or the photographs of police vehicles. It may focus on how the system responded. Did it remain measured? Did it remain fair? Did it remain consistent? Those answers will shape public perception far more than any headline.